Welcome into another educational video for the International Wine and Food Society here in Birmingham, Alabama. We're your hosts, the dynamic Drew O, joined again by special guest Gia, and we are here to dive into two very exciting regions in Italy. We are going to be examining Tuscany and the Piemonte. So we are going to get to have some fantastic wines. We're actually going to do this in two segments. Because of the amount of wines we're going to do. We're actually going to kind of compare and contrast the regions as we go through a couple of whites, as we go through kind of some entry tier, or what we would consider, the values, the deals in red, and then we'll kind of get into maybe some of the more signature wines from the region, and then some pretty top tier, upper echelon stuff as well. So, and as we go through all that, we've got some various meats and cheeses from across northern Italy and Tuscany as well. So this should be quite the tasting.
Did you get these from Son of a Butcher?
These did in fact come from Son of a Butcher in right there off 3rd Avenue, right next to Oven Bird. It's a fantastic shop. The selection of meat and cheese is absolutely incredible. I went in and I said, I'm doing a video on Italian wine and I need snacks. And this is they did not disappoint.
They were happy to oblige.
They were more than happy to oblige. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into some white wines. I think that a lot of times when people think Italian white wine, we all know what the first thing that comes to mind is, and that's Pinot Grigio. Yes. And there's certainly some good Pinot Grigio out there, but I think we're going to hopefully maybe expand some horizons and talk about some really fun things that have a little more kind of character and a little more just intellectual things going on.
So this is an exciting tasting for me because traditionally I have not tasted or focused on Tuscany in my personal cellar, and a lot of times with what I normally drink. I do drink a lot of Piedmontese wines, so that some of these are very old, familiar stuff. But at International, Gia is definitely our resident expert on Italian wines. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of Tuscany and Piedmont, and kind of, a brief kind of, I know it's all kind of started with the Romans kind of deal, but, when did we start to see Tuscany and Piedmont, the evolution of that as an industrial wine market?
Well, first of all, I'm glad that we have snacks because Italians do truly see wines as a condiment, as part of the table. And if there's one thing that's kind of a constant to me through Italian wines, it's going to be acidity. And I think we'll taste that today. Acidity and tannin, but those things really, really like food. So this is, matching the wines with these particular meats and cheeses or any sort of dishes is a fantastic component. So thanks for bringing snacks along. So Tuscany, just some ideas about Tuscany. Everybody knows Tuscany is the heart of right there in the center, but the main grape that grows in this area is Sangiovese, which is Chianti. So Chianti is the region, Sangiovese is the grape, okay? But it has several different names that we'll kind of talk about. And there is just a couple of white wines, and same for Piedmont. Really what has ruled in Piedmont is the Nebbiolo grape. However, there's some beautiful Barberas and Dolcettos, and of course the white grape being Arnese. And Moscato. So
very well known.
We can't forget about Moscato being a very important part. So, it was the Etruscans who started making the wines in Tuscany, which is where the name comes from. Yeah. And in Piedmont, really you started to see more focus on Barolos and Barbarescos like in the 1800s. So, but of course grapes have been grown there for forever. Right. So,
you talked about food in this area, and I think it's also, yes, we have this wonderful snacks, but Drew, this is not what, there are certain kind of regional things that are known in this area. So when we're doing food comparisons, we're not talking about necessarily bolognese going with these. It can, but what kind of is the food? Because a lot of times, especially in the old world, wine was synonymous with what the foods were there. So what kind of foods are we going to typically see from Piedmont and Tuscany?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, I think that if we look at Old World in particular, I think that one thing we have to remember is geographically where people in the regions are, while there may be similar spice palettes and some similar ingredients, the focal point is you've got people who are not really traveling far to get there, right? They're not hopping on the horse and buggy and going an hour to go to a grocery store to get stuff, right? So it's what they have. It's what's on the farm. So you're talking a lot of fresh produce, a lot of fresh vegetables. You're talking a lot of live fire cooking, and a lot of, what's traditional is curing of the meats, right? Because you have certain cuts of meat that are, of course, going to be cut down into steaks and things like that. But some of the other things, the cheek and some of these rougher kind of shoulder cuts and things, that's where the butchers figured out, well, we have something we can do with this. This is where the salumi and all that comes from. So when I think of like what is kind of this idea of rustic Italian cooking, be it from Tuscany or from the Piedmont, I'm really thinking things like, one of the most famous dishes that we were actually talking about before we started filming, bistecca florentina, right? Which is a massive porterhouse thick it's live fire cooked over an open wood fire and high heat and just this unctuous, aged beef kind of flavor that you get. And I think that what it is you're bringing in and you're introducing a lot of other flavors into the cuisine, like very high quality olive oils, things like we have here. This actually is Sicilian olive oil, but very high acidity, grassy olive oils, smoke from the live fire, and then you've got root vegetables and certainly some tomatoes, and just everything just has this sense of place and this sense of it's got hands on it.
Sure.
You know what I mean? It's everything's made fresh, everything's made in house because there's no other choice.
Right.
There's no other options.
But regionally, I think that there are some, like you kind of talked about, there's some definitely some regional dishes. So
Right.
like bistec Florentine, that's really what you're going to find a lot of in Tuscany is going to be beef. Whereas you go up north, start getting into Piedmont, it's cooler up there. Especially, It's a little bit more seasonal, and because it's really close to Milan. This is where risotto is what you're going to find a little bit more in Piedmont.
Some of the best rice in the world.
Exactly,
and pigs.
Exactly,
a lot
pigs.
more pork.
A lot of pigs. Truffles. This is where the home of black truffles. This is the home of hazelnuts. This is where
A lot more earthy flavors.
A lot more earthy flavors.
Yeah.
And there's a very particular dish in Piedmont that stupefies me to this day is vitello tonato. Why the Piemontese decide to put veal with tuna is beyond me, but they do love that dish.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Look that one up.
It certainly is it's a traditional dish, but I would say I think for my palate, I think I'm much more give me the Barolo with a pile of truffles, and we're just going to call
And you're
it a
good to
day.
go, right?
Well, and you mentioned tuna. Obviously, it's Italy and surrounded by water, so there's always going to be a seafood component, unless you're in the very middle of the country, of course.
Right.
Which probably would be a good way to kind of talk about the white wines and
Yeah.
what that would go. So our
Yeah.
first wine here.
This is there's not a lot of white wines coming from Tuscany. There you get some a little bit of Orvieto, but one of the coolest and most interesting wines to me is Vernaccia di San Gimignano. And San Gimignano is this little teeny tiny medieval village in Tuscany that does one thing, and that is Vernaccia.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
That
no
is-
reds, no other whites.
They are specialized.
just-
It's Vernaccia di San Gimignano, and it's a great food wine. All these wines are going to be food wines. But it's just got that really nice acid to it, a little bit of fruit, a little bit of minerality. And this is from this winery is called La Lastra, and it's pretty new to us in Alabama. But this is what they make.
This is good. Around what kind of price point?
Oh, so these are gonna be pretty affordable. I want to say like maybe $18.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, this is what, to coin a phrase I've borrowed from a friend of mine a lot of times, this is what, Grigio wants to be when it grows up. I mean,
Yeah.
it's got that nice acidity, but
Right.
it's also not, a lot of times Pinot Grigio, and there's some well-made ones, but a lot of times they're very watery is a common descriptor, or very just easy
I think
drinking.
they just got overproduced at some point.
Yeah.
But
Well, my point is,
Yeah.
like, this has got some richness to it on the back end as well, which
Yeah.
makes me want to have food with it as well, and not just have it, as a BTG at a bar or something like that.
Yeah, no, this is something that's like can certainly go well. I mean, I kind of did the olive thing with this, and it's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
And certainly I could see with like some of the cheeses, like the Robbiolo here would probably be a fantastic option, or even the Pecorino should be, the Pecorino coming from the same region, or not far at least. But yeah, I mean, it's got this brightness, this acidity, this citrus component, but it's certainly got some mouthfeel to it. But it's not weighty. It's not flabby in any
Clean,
way.
very clean.
Yeah.
I think it's worth noting that when we are talking regional with food, we're also talking regional with grapes. people in San Gimignano are not going to drink Pinot Grigio.
Right.
Historically, right? You know,
right.
so
And going back to what you were saying, they only grow Vernaccia there. That's by law, correct?
yes.
Okay, so it's kind of one of those hard and fast rules. Again, preserving the history of the culture in the area, just like they do in France. There's a lot of times where you're going to find with these DOCGs and DOCs,
Thanks.
by law you have to do certain rules, whether it's growing a certain amount of Sangiovese or only growing this one grape in the case of this wine.
Yep.
So great. Next up, we've got an Arnase.
Yes. So there is. So this we're in Piedmont again, and we're talking about Arnase, and Arnase is one of those grapes that has a couple of different stories that goes along with it. It was found planted throughout Piedmont, kind of interspersed with the Nebbiolo grapes, and nobody really understood why.
Right.
One thought is that maybe that Arnase was planted so that the birds would eat it because it ripens a little bit faster than Nebbiolo, so it would kind of give them something to eat. Or
and leave the Nebbiolo alone.
Leave the Nebbiolo alone. Or historically, Nebbiolos, Barberas, and Barolos were these really big, tough, super tannic wines, and so maybe some Arnase was planted to kind of lighten the profile.
So kind of like a co-fermenting thing, like they do in the Northern Rhone.
Yeah. So that's kind of the thought. So what happened then was at Vietti, which is the reason I chose this wine to talk about, was that Alfredo Curado back in the 60s kept seeing all this little Arnase grape planted, and so. You know, back then in the village of Castiglione, there's no Google, right? You can't Google little white grapes, so you do the closest thing to Googling, which is you go talk to your local priest.
Right.
So after church one day after Mass, Alfredo goes to the priest and is like, "I got this grape," and so the priest is like, "I think I'll figure it out." The next Sunday, 35 farmers show up with baskets of Arnase.
Wow.
Because they're like, yeah, we don't know what this
Whatever
is
you
either,
want, yeah.
right? So, so he really is noted for cultivating or recultivating, I should say, Arnase and making it an important part of Piemonte wine.
And I think it's
That's
worth
fantastic.
noting, we've seen, nationally in the U.S., but also in Alabama, several selections of Arnase, in the last 10 years, which kind of, again, to your point, shows there are other options other than Moscato. But more importantly, the dedication to people like Vietti and others that want to get this white wine of Piedmont into people's hands. It's very good. I've always found that Arnase has a certain kind of apple-y component to it.
Yeah.
Now it can go from, more lush apple, but more kind of that green apple. So you have a little bit of that kind of nice
There's
acidity.
a tartness to
It's
it.
a tart, acidic.
There's a little tartness to it that's nice, and it's also, especially this one, is a little bit more. There's some floral notes
Yeah.
to it,
Totally.
just on that first bouquet.
That's what I was gonna say. It's almost like I feel that apple vibe going on, but then with the floor, it's like apple blossoms.
Right.
Yeah.
Like those beautiful white flowers before the fruit sets in. I mean, that's all day for
A
Is
me.
lot
that
of-
from when you go apple picking in
Right.
Down
in
in
New
yeah,
England?
down in
Okay,
the county.
yes,
yeah.
okay, yeah.
A lot of people might be familiar with Vietti. It's been a very popular wine for a lot of restaurants and
Yeah.
retailers here in town, especially their Barbera.
Yes.
So I would definitely recommend trying the white wine at some point. It's a really tasty selection.
Yeah.
Great. All right, so now we're going to move over into, I would assume, our Sangiovese and then Piedmont.
Yeah. So I thought I would do something a little different and not focus solely on Chianti
Great.
to talk about Tuscan Reds. And so this one is actually Losa is the name of the winery, and it is from Maremma. So Maremma is on kind of going west from Tuscany. It's really close to the Tyrrhenian Sea. And for years, this was like spa world, like luxury resorts, all this
Coastal
kind of stuff.
town,
Coastal,
right?
very
Yeah.
coastal.
Yeah.
But they have been started planting some grapes there in this area of Maremma. It predominantly Sangiovese, and this one is mainly Sangiovese with a little Ciliegelo, which is, my Italian is not perfect today. But Ciliegelo is a blending grape that you'll find in Chianti.
Right.
But this one is, there's about 15% of
So a good
that
percentage of that, yeah.
in this particular wine. But really good value wines there, really interesting wines. Again, just kind of stepping outside of Chianti to look for Sangiovese, which, talking about Sangiovese, there's several different names of it that you'll find. So, for instance, Montepulciano
Right.
is a synonym for, not to be confused with Montepulciano di Abruzzo. That's a grape that's over there, but you have Vino Nobile de Montepulciano, which is the region, which is where Sangiovese grows. You also hear Sangiovetto, you also hear Sangiovese Grosso. There's just a bunch of different kind of names for Sangiovese, but it is king of Tuscany, is Sangiovese.
And it's a great point, and that can be very confusing, especially to people who are just getting into Italian wines and just getting into Tuscan wines. Oh, there's a bunch of different Sangioveses, or they're all different. Maybe within a context of where they're grown and the kind of terroir,
Yeah.
but they are kind of even within Tuscany, there's a lot of little villages and stuff like that cultivated their own version of the language and
Yeah.
named things differently at times.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things on grapes is to talk about the roots of how they got their name. Sangiovese, the etymology of that is from the ancient Latin meaning blood of Jovis, or Jupiter, and it's because of the soil in this area. It has a lot of copper and it's got an orange tint, and the wines, especially when Sangiovese ages, will take on a terracotta kind of hue.
That Bricco.
Bricco, right, and so that's kind of where they got the name for this type of wine, for this grape.
Yeah.
This is great. What kind of price point are we talking about?
Again, we're still even like around $18, under 20.
Fantastic. And
Usually wines from this region, from the Maremma. This is a Morellina di Scansano.
Right.
And this is a DOC, so that's...
And this is from a pretty well-known producer in the state called Poliziano, correct?
Yes.
This is their Morellano
yes, so
estate,
Poliziano
right?
is in Montepulciano, and this is their Maremma.
I saw
the
it.
wine
It's really good.
from Maremma. So Morellina di Scansano is the DOC. Sangiovese is the grape. Again, it's part of Tuscany.
Right. Perfect.
Yeah.
This is absolutely fantastic. I think that the key to me is that, like, a lot of times when I think, Tuscany and Tuscan Reds, like, you feel like you're going to be spending a lot of money for some reason, because I think a lot of people are familiar with, like, Brunello di Montalcino and all those things, which we'll certainly talk about. But it's incredible to find, like, sub-$20 bottles that are not just bulk, cheap Chianti, you know what I mean? Like, that wine has character, that wine has finesse, it's elegant, it's got tannin, it's got acidity, it's got all these lovely things that, like, that's Wednesday night pizza wine.
Well,
Oh,
what
for sure.
What I like about that one in particular is, while it's going great with food, it was really just good by itself.
Yeah.
It's one that I could just see, like, I want a glass of red wine.
It's hard to find quote unquote cocktail wines
Yeah, for
in
Italy.
Italy that you can
totally.
just kind of sip on, kind of enjoy. I think Pinot Grigio is definitely that white
Yeah, of
wine,
course.
but no, this one is kind of a good sipper.
Yeah.
Well said. Very well said.
So moving back to Piedmont, we
Yeah.
are now doing the Barbaresco.
No, this is
Sorry.
Barbera.
Barbera
Barbaros.
Alba.
Yeah.
Barbera d'Alba.
So this is from Piedmont, which is one of our favorite wines, one of our favorite projects that we work with in Alabama, and this is the Barbera. So Barbera is going to be one of the grapes that you really kind of find down in the valley of Piedmont. All the Nebbiolo gets all the good hillside stuff, right?
Sure.
So Barbera and Dolcetto is all the stuff that you kind of find in the valley, but Barberas to me are, and I do use this term a lot. If you don't like Italian wines or don't know anything about Italian wines, I say try a Barbera. Barbera to me is the gateway drug to Italy.
It's very approachable. Yeah.
It's very, if you like Pinot Noir, you will probably like a Barbera, and that's that's how I kind of introduce it to people.
Now, and really, we're sharing the Barbera d'Alba, and usually there's Barbera d'Alba and Asti, and that just means the little village from where
That's the
that
town,
comes
right?
from.
So it's Barbera from Alba, Barbera from...
Right. And you'll see that with Dolcetto as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but yeah, this is a very easy drinking wine. Again, a Wednesday night pizza wine.
Right.
That's is just really fantastic. And again, we're not talking about a lot of money. Barberas and Dolcetto, you don't spend a lot of money of those because that's the cash flow.
Yeah.
For the most part, a lot of these people who are making their Barolos or Barbarescos, they've got a lot of money tied into those. The juice that's in those barrels that's aging for the aging requirements.
Yeah, it takes a lot longer.
Right.
But
so,
these, I think, also over-deliver for that price point, too. I think
Yeah.
So that brings up a great point, though, too. Like, and we would be remiss if we didn't bring it up real quick. So for the whites, so if we go back to the Vernachka and the Arnaise, what would those wines? Do we feel like I feel like they're meant to be enjoyed kind of fresh and young and while they're still bright. Like I wouldn't say like either of those, like that's not like white Burgundy. We're not putting it down for 20 years.
Oh, no.
Like drink those now.
Yeah.
When we talk about the reds, where's kind of that sweet spot? Like, I mean, while they can be opened right away and they're great, I mean, how long do we think these things, these seem to me like really good 3 to 5 year bottles, somewhere in that range where, you're grabbing them out of the cellar, kind of grab it, buy a case, throw it down there and grab them over a little bit of time or something like that.
Don't forget about them for 20 years.
Yeah,
Right.
I don't know. If I buy a Barbera, it's because I'm going to drink it.
Mm-hmm.
That's usually how and the same maybe for that Losa. Like those are wines that you could probably stand to get a couple of years out of them, but for the most part, they are designed to be drinking.
So we need to be, we're talking, it needs to be within 3 to 5 years from the vintage date.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't think you're going to be bad if it's past that 5-year mark. It's just you're not going to get any kind of extra oomph out of it.
Yeah, I feel like part of what makes the first 4 wines so special is that fruit, that vibrancy, that acidity kind of just dancing around on the palate and stuff like that. But I mean, this Barbera is fantastic, not only by itself, but with the, with kind of the charcuterie and, could also see this honestly with just like, again, pizza or just a simple pasta dish with a little red sauce or something like that.
Look, we're making a lot of comparisons with Italian food because that's a natural inclination, but don't just limit these wines to Italian food. This would be great with a burger.
I was literally going to say
Barbera. Barbera is actually fantastic with seared tuna.
Oh, perfect.
Like I know that seems really random, but it's like one of those because you got some of them got a little bit of fat to it, but
sure.
No, you don't have to just stick to Italian.
Of course,
food.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Well, that is going to wrap up part 1, but don't go anywhere. We have part 2 coming your way next.